My name is Benjamin Carter. Until 6 months ago, I was a captain in the United States Army Military Police Corps. My world was one of rigid structures, clear chains of command, and rules of engagement that, while complex, were ultimately logical. After my final tour, I found myself craving something different, yet familiar. I wanted solitude without isolation, purpose without politics. I wanted a world governed by laws far older and simpler than any man-made code of justice. That's what led me to the National Park Service, and that's how I ended up driving a government-issue pickup truck into the heart of Yellowstone National Park, the world's first and arguably wildest national park. The drive-in from the south entrance was a masterclass in nature's overwhelming scale. The vastness of the place is something you can't truly grasp from photographs. At over 2.2 million acres, it's larger than Rhode Island and Delaware combined. The road wound through dense forests of lodgepole pine, which cover about 80% of the park. They're tall, straight trunks forming a palisade against the outside world. To the east, the jagged, formidable peaks of the Absaroka Range clawed at the sky, some summits soaring over 10,000 feet. It was a landscape of profound, almost intimidating beauty. But beneath the postcard, perfect surface, there was a disquieting undercurrent. As I drove deeper into the park, the air began to change. A faint, sharp smell, like struck matches, drifted on the breeze. Sulfur. Wisps of steam ghosted from the forest floor in unexpected places, blurring the edges of the trees. It was a constant, visual reminder that I was driving across the Yellowstone Plateau, a landscape sitting atop an active supervolcano, the largest on the continent. This park is home to more than 10,000 hydrothermal features, half of all those known on Earth. The ground beneath my tires was alive, breathing, and simmering with forces I couldn't begin to comprehend. The stunning beauty felt like a mask, a beautiful facade, stretched thin over something primal and dangerous. It was a place of conflicting signals, and I hadn't even reached my station yet. My assignment was to a remote substation in the park's southern district, a stone's throw from the shores of Shoshone Lake. It wasn't one of the bustling hubs like Old Faithful or Mammoth Hot Springs. It was an outpost, a lonely bastion against the true wilderness. The station itself was a simple, sturdy log structure, built to withstand the brutal winters where temperatures can plummet to unimaginable lows. The record is a staggering 66 degree Fs, 54 degrees C. Waiting for me on the porch was Senior Ranger Silas Blackwood, my field training officer. He was a man who seemed carved from the landscape itself. He had to be in his late 60s, with a face like a topographical map of the park, all crags, canyons, and deep, set lines. He was lean and weathered, and his quiet, watchful eyes seemed to miss nothing. He didn't look like the crisp, professional rangers I'd met during training. He looked like something older, a throwback to the park's first guardians, the tough-as-nails Army scouts and gamekeepers who patrolled this land long before the modern NPS existed. "Carter," he said, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't a question. He extended a calloused hand, his grip firm and dry. "You're late. Road work by Lewis Falls, sir?" I replied, falling back on military habit. He just grunted, a sound that could have meant anything. "No, sir. Out here. It's Silas. Let's get you squared away. Sun'll be down in a few hours." The orientation was exactly what I expected. Silas walked me through the official duties with a kind of wary patience, as if he'd given this speech 100 times. We covered patrol routes, the proper way to handle bear, jams on the roads, and the importance of visitor education. He drilled me on the wildlife safety protocols, the ones plastered on every visitor center wall. 25 yards from bison and elk, 100 yards from bears and wolves. No exceptions, he said, pinning me with his gaze. A bison looks slow, but it can outrun you, outturn you, and put a horn through your truck door before you can blink. They weigh up to 2,000 pounds. Don't ever mistake them for docile. It was all standard procedure, the kind of by the book information I was used to. It was logical, practical, and designed to keep both people and animals safe in a shared environment. I felt comfortable. I was on solid ground. That feeling lasted until the sun began to dip below the tree line, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The official part of my day was over. Silas had been quiet for the last hour, watching me unpack my gear into the small attached bunkroom. When I was finished, he gestured for me to follow him back into the main office. The room was now cast in long shadows, the only light coming from a single desk lamp. The air grew still. Silas knelt and unlocked a heavy, old-fashioned footlocker tucked away in a corner, the kind the military used to issue. It looked like it had been there since the cavalry vacated Fort Yellowstone back in 1918. Instead of pulling out more maps or equipment, he retrieved a single object, a leather-bound 3-ring binder. The leather was dark with age and cracked at the spine. It wasn't stamped with any official NPS seal. There was no title, no markings at all. He placed it on the wooden desk between us with a soft, final thud. "The official briefing is over, Carter," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The wariness was gone, replaced by a grim intensity that made the hairs on my arms stand up. That rule book is for the tourists. It's for keeping them from falling into geysers or getting gored by bison. It's for managing the park they think they're visiting. He tapped a leathery finger on the cover of the binder. This one is for us. This is the real rule book. These are the regulations that keep us alive. You will learn them. You will memorize them. And you will follow them to the letter, no matter how little sense they make to you. Your life depends on it. Do you understand? I stared at him, then at the binder. My mind, trained in logic and procedure, immediately rebelled. This had to be some kind of hazing ritual, an elaborate prank played on the new guy, the 90-day wonder, as the old-timers used to call seasonals. But the look in Silas's eyes held no humor. It held a deep, profound fear that seemed etched into his very soul. My skepticism faltered. I nodded slowly. He said. He opened the binder. The pages inside were yellowed and brittle, filled with typed entries and handwritten notes in various scripts, some dating back decades. The first page was a table, stark and official-looking, completely at odds with the binder's ancient appearance. "These are the standing orders for District 7, Silas said. "Read them." I leaned forward, the desk lamp illuminating the text, and as I read, the solid ground I'd been standing on all day crumbled into dust. The Yellowstone Regulations. District 7 Southern Boundary Rule 1T. All patrols must be concluded and personnel must be inside a hard-sided structure by astronomical twilight. No exceptions. Rule 29. Do not approach wildlife behaving erratically, specifically bison, that stand unnaturally still and face away from you. Report and withdraw. Rule 3A. If you hear rhythmic tapping or clicking sounds from within the petrified forest, do not investigate. It is not woodpeckers. Leave the area immediately. Rule 4E. The waters of Isa Lake drain to 2 oceans. Do not drink from the eastern outflow, Pacific. Rule 5E. If you hear a voice that sounds like a crying child near the thermal pools of the West Thumb Geyser Basin, it is a lure. Do not follow it. Activate your emergency beacon if it persists. Rule 60. Never remove any object, living or dead, from the area known as Death Gulch or its immediate watershed. This includes rocks, bones, or plant matter. Rule 7. If you find a trail marker or cairn that is not on your official map, do not follow it. Dismantle it if possible, but do not use your bare hands. Rule 80: if, during a patrol on Yellowstone Lake, you see a lone figure standing on the shore of the section designated, the unsurveyed 97%, do not make landfall. Do not acknowledge them. Return to base. I read the list once, then twice. My mind raced, trying to fit these bizarre directives into a logical framework. Rule 1 was just common sense safety. Rule 2 was an oddly specific, but still plausible, addendum to standard wildlife procedure. But after that, the list veered sharply into the territory of folklore and delusion. Tapping sounds in a forest of stone trees. A specific outflow of a lake being forbidden. A child's cry as a lure. It sounded like something out of a cheap horror novel, not an official set of regulations for federal officers. Rule 8 was perhaps the most unsettling. The idea that 97% of this vast park remains unsurveyed by archaeologists is a documented fact. It's a staggering amount of unknown territory. But to codify a rule about seeing a lone figure on its shores felt like a step beyond procedure and into paranoia. I looked up from the page, my face a mask of disbelief. I wanted to laugh, to call him on the prank, but Silas was just watching me, his expression unchanged. He knew what I was thinking. He'd seen it before. "They're not jokes, Carter," he said softly, as if reading my mind. Every rule in that book was written in blood. My advice to you is to forget everything you think you know about how the world works. Out here, the rules are different. He closed the binder, the sound echoing in the silent room. Outside, the last light of day had vanished, and a profound, absolute darkness had fallen over Yellowstone. The kind of darkness that felt ancient and heavy, full of secrets I was now, apparently, sworn to keep. Sleep offered no escape. My dreams were a chaotic slideshow of the rules from Silas's binder, each one twisting into a grotesque scenario. I saw petrified trees whose branches clicked and tapped like skeletal fingers, and a child's ghostly face shimmering above the scalding steam of a geyser pool. I woke before my alarm, the phantom smell of sulfur in my nostrils, and the weight of those bizarre regulations pressing down on me. In the cold light of dawn, with the world painted in the gentle pastels of a Wyoming sunrise, the fear of the previous night felt absurd. It had to be a prank, a test for the new guy. Silas was probably having a good chuckle over his morning coffee. I walked into the main office, determined to project an air of unbothered professionalism. Silas was already there, cleaning a rifle with meticulous, practiced movements. He didn't look like a man who had been chuckling. He looked as grim and serious as he had the night before. He glanced up as I entered, his eyes lingering on me for a moment before nodding towards the coffee pot. "First patrol in 30, he said, his voice flat. "We'll take the southern loop, check the trailheads near Lewis and Shoshone." As we drove, my military-trained mind went to work, deconstructing the rules, searching for the logic I was so certain had to be there. "You know, Silas," I began, trying to sound casual. "I was thinking about that list. The rules. It's quite their introduction." He just grunted, his eyes fixed on the road. "I mean, it's clever." I pressed on. "A good way to instill caution. The crying child near the geysers. Classic mountain lion vocalization. People mistake them for human screams all the time. The tapping in the petrified forest. Probably thermal stress fractures in the silica. Rich rock as temperatures fluctuate. It's all explainable, if you think about it." Silas brought the truck to a slow stop in the middle of the empty road. The engine idled, the only sound in the vast, silent landscape. He turned to look at me, and the wariness in his face was ancient. You think you're the first one to try and explain it all away, Carter? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. You think you're the first ranger with a bit of education who thought he could apply textbook logic to this place. That binder is full of handwritten notes. Some of them are updates. Most of them are eulogies for rangers who thought the same way you do. Rangers who heard a child crying and went to be heroes. Rangers who saw an unmapped trail and thought they'd discovered a shortcut. He pointed a leathery finger toward a distant, dark cleft in the mountains, a place where the trees seemed stunted and the rock had a sickly, yellowish tint. You see that valley? Locals call it Death Gulch. Rule 6. Back in the 1880s, a geologist named Weed found it full of dead animals. Bears, elk, squirrels, everything. Suffocated by carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide gas seeping from the ground. The rule says don't take anything from it. About 15 years ago, a seasonal ranger, a kid named Miller, smart as a whip, geology major, thought it would be funny to bring back a rock for his girlfriend. A souvenir from Death Gulch. He went back to his dorm at Mammoth that night. The next morning, his roommate woke up, but Miller didn't. Coroner said it was a massive, inexplicable brain aneurysm. The rock was on his nightstand, so you go ahead and explain that one to me with your science. I fell silent. The story was chilling, but still, it could be a coincidence. A tragic, but explainable, medical event used to prop up a local legend. My skepticism was a fortress, and it wouldn't fall that easily. We continued our patrol. The day was beautiful. The kind of day that makes you believe the world is a fundamentally good and orderly place. We checked on a few hikers, cleared a fallen branch from a trail, and moved on. It was all routine, exactly the job I had signed up for. Then, as we rounded a bend overlooking the vast expanse of the Hayden Valley, we saw it. A classic Yellowstone traffic jam. Dozens of cars were pulled over haphazardly, and tourists were milling about on the road, cameras and phones held aloft. The cause was a large herd of bison, grazing peacefully in the sagebrush flats 100 yards away. It was a magnificent sight, a vision of the American West. Silas handled it with bored efficiency, using the truck's PA system to gently but firmly order people back into their vehicles. Folks, please return to your cars. You're creating a hazard. Give the animals their space, at least 25 yards. Most people complied, grumbling but obedient. As the traffic began to clear, I felt a sense of relief. This was the park I understood. This was manageable. That's when I saw it. About a quarter-mile further down the road, long after the main herd had been left behind, a single, massive bull bison stood by the shoulder. It was enormous, a mountain of dark fur and muscle, probably weighing close to a ton. But it wasn't its size that made my blood run cold. It was its posture. It stood perfectly still, its back to us, its head lowered. It was an exact replica of the scenario described in Rule V2A. Do not approach wildlife behaving erratically, specifically bison that stand unnaturally still and face away from you. Report and withdraw. Silas, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He had already seen it. His hands, which had been relaxed on the steering wheel, were now clamped down tight. His knuckles were white. Don't make a sound, he hissed. My mind screamed in protest. It was just a bison, a stubborn old bull. All we had to do was give a short blast from the horn, and it would move. It was blocking our path. My training, my entire life experience, told me to take logical, simple action. We should just nudge it along. I suggested, my voice tight. Shut up, Carter. Silas whispered, his eyes locked on the creature. He wasn't looking at it like a ranger observing an animal. He was looking at it like a soldier staring at a landmine. He slowly, deliberately, shifted the truck into reverse. The transmission clicked softly, a sound that seemed as loud as a gunshot in the sudden, profound silence. As we began to inch backward, the bison remained motionless, but the world around it seemed to change. The gentle breeze died. The chirping of birds in the nearby pines ceased. A heavy, oppressive silence fell over the valley, a silence so complete it felt like a physical pressure against my eardrums. And then it happened. The bison didn't turn around. It didn't charge. It did something far worse, something that violated every law of biology I knew. Its massive, shaggy head began to rotate. Not a turn, but a slow, mechanical swivel, like the turret of a tank. The thick, muscular neck twisted impossibly, past 90 degrees, past 180, the sound of popping vertebrae echoing in the dead air. The body remained perfectly still, facing away from us, but the head kept turning until it was completely upside down, staring directly at us over its own back. And its eyes. I will never forget the eyes. They weren't the dark, placid eyes of a herbivore. They were intelligent, ancient, and filled with a bottomless, calculating malice. They weren't animal eyes. They were something else entirely. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My fortress of skepticism hadn't just fallen, it had been vaporized. Every rational explanation, every scientific theory, turned to ash in my mouth. This was real. The rules were real. Silas didn't wait. The moment the head locked onto us, he slammed the truck into drive, spun the wheel, and executed a jarring 3-point turn in the middle of the road. He floored the accelerator, and the truck fishtailed on the asphalt before finding purchase, rocketing away in the opposite direction. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The image of that upside, down head, and those hateful eyes was burned onto the inside of my eyelids. We drove for 5 miles in absolute silence before Silas finally pulled over, his hands shaking slightly as he killed the engine. He took a long, shuddering breath. "Every rule in that book, Carter," he said, his voice raspy. "Every single one was written because someone saw what you just saw. Or worse, they didn't follow the rule. And they paid for it." He looked at me, his face pale. Welcome to Yellowstone. My day wasn't over. As we drove back to the station, the sun beginning its slow descent, the radio crackled to life. It was another ranger, his voice strained with static and tension. "Dispatch, this is 3, Echo, 9 at West Thumb. We've got a situation. A visitor is reporting the sound of a crying child near Abyss Pool." My stomach clenched. Rule Feint 5. If you hear a voice that sounds like a crying child near the thermal pools, it is a lure. The dispatcher's voice came back, clipped and professional, but with an unmistakable undercurrent of urgency. 3, Echo, 9, confirm. Are there any active missing persons reports in your area? Negative. Dispatch. All parties accounted for. But the visitor is insistent. The sound is very convincing. There was a pause that stretched for an eternity. Then the dispatcher's voice, cold as ice. "Roger, 3 Echo, 9. Acknowledge Rule 5. I repeat, acknowledge Rule 5. Do not investigate. Withdraw from the area and advise the visitor to do the same." Immediately, acknowledged. The ranger replied, his voice sounding small and very far away. Silas turned off the radio. The cab of the truck was dark now. I stared out at the passing forest, but I didn't see the trees. I saw an upside down head with eyes that hated me. I heard the phantom sound of a child crying, a sound designed to pull you into boiling water. I looked down at my own hands, and for the first time since my last tour overseas, they were trembling. The rules weren't a prank. They weren't folklore. They were a survival manual for a war I hadn't known I was fighting. And I had just survived my first battle. The drive back to the station was a journey through a world that had been fundamentally broken and reassembled into something monstrous. The familiar pines and distant peaks no longer looked beautiful. They looked like teeth in a jagged jaw, a cage for things that should not exist. The silence in the truck was absolute, broken only by the crunch of tires on gravel. I didn't ask any more questions. The radio call about the crying child at West Thumb had been the final, brutal confirmation. Rule Fane 5 was active. It was happening right now. My attempts to rationalize, to fit this place into the neat boxes of logic and science, felt like the naive ramblings of a child. Silas didn't speak until we were back inside the station. The heavy wooden door bolted behind us, a flimsy shield against the oppressive darkness. He poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a pair of chipped glasses without asking if I wanted any. He knew I did. He pushed one across the desk to me. "The ranger at West Thumb is a good man," Silas said, his voice low and gravelly. "He's been here 5 seasons. He knows the rule. He'll get the tourist out, but he'll hear that sound in his sleep for the next month." I took a long swallow of the whiskey. It burned a welcome trail down my throat. "How?" I finally managed to ask, the single word encompassing 1,000 questions. "How is any of this possible? How do you do this job? How are you still sane?" Silas seemed to understand. He sank into his chair, the leather groaning under his weight. "You think we're the first to stand this watch, Carter? You think these rules were invented last year?" He shook his head, a wary, ancient gesture. "This place, it's older than the park, older than America. The rules are just our attempt to write down the warnings that have always been here." He leaned forward, his eyes catching the lamplight. "When the U.S. cavalry was sent in to protect the park back in the 1880s, it wasn't just from poachers and souvenir hunters. The official histories will tell you about the soldiers stopping vandalism and building trails. But the old logs, the unofficial ones, they tell different stories. Stories of patrols that went into certain valleys and came out with one less man, with no explanation. Stories of scouts. Taz, Nail's frontiersmen who could track a wolf through a blizzard, who refused to camp near the thermal basins after dark. They were the first to start learning the rules the hard way." He took a sip of his whiskey. "Before them, the native tribes, they knew. The myth we tell the tourists is that the Indians were afraid of the geysers, that they thought the basins were haunted by evil spirits. It was a convenient lie. It made it easier to push them out, to claim this land was an untouched wilderness. The truth is, they weren't afraid. They were respectful. They understood that this land has a power, and that power is not friendly. One of their legends says they were warned never to tell the white man about this place, lest he form a league with the devils and use that power to destroy them. They weren't wrong. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture more terrifying than I could have imagined. We weren't park rangers. We were wardens, and the park itself was the prison. The next morning, the sun rose on a world that felt no safer than it had in the dark. The routine was the only thing that kept me grounded. Check the truck, check the gear, get the patrol assignment. Silas decided we would check the trails around the northern shore of Shoshone Lake, a remote area rarely visited by casual tourists. It was a quiet, uneventful morning. The normalcy was almost seductive, lulling me back into a false sense of security. Around noon, we were inspecting a trailhead marker at the entrance to a little, used path when I saw it. About 50 yards past the official NPS sign, there was another trail. It wasn't on our maps. It was narrow, almost hidden, but clearly deliberate. And at its entrance stood a small pile of stones, a cairn. But it was wrong, all wrong. The stones weren't the usual gray granite or brown river rock of the area. They were a pale, milky white, like quartz, but they seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. They were stacked with an unnatural precision, each one perfectly balanced. My heart hammered against my ribs. Rule Phase 7A. If you find a trail marker or cairn that is not on your official map, do not follow it. Dismantle it if possible, but do not use your bare hands. Seal us, I said, my voice strained. He was already looking at it, his face a mask of grim recognition. Get the entrenching tool from the truck, he ordered, his voice sharp. As I turned to go, a family of 4, a mother, a father, and 2 young kids, came around the bend. They were decked out in brand new hiking gear, looking bright-eyed and excited. The father pointed toward the unofficial trail. "Oh, look, honey, that one's not on the brochure map. Must be one of the secret trails." "Let's check it out," he said, his voice full of cheerful ignorance. A cold dread washed over me. Before Silas could move, I stepped forward, putting myself between the family and the pale cairn. "Sir, I'm sorry, but that trail is closed for maintenance," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. The man frowned. "Closed? There's no sign. It looks fine to me." His son, a boy of about 10, started to dart around me toward the trail. "It's not safe," I said, my voice harder than I intended. I instinctively put out an arm to stop the boy, making sure not to touch him, just blocking his path. The area is geologically unstable. Please, for your family's safety, stick to the marked paths. The father bristled at my tone, his vacation good mood evaporating. "Now, see here. We're just trying to enjoy the park." "Who are you two?" "He's a federal officer telling you that trail is closed." Silas cut in, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. He had the entrenching tool in his hand, and he looked less like a park ranger and more like an old soldier about to defuse a bomb. "You and your family will return to the main path. Now." The family, sensing the sudden, deadly seriousness in the air, finally backed away, muttering about overly aggressive rangers. They disappeared down the trail, and the woods fell silent again. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My hands were shaking. "Good work, Carter," Silas said quietly. "You learn fast." He walked to the cairn, holding the steel shovel like a weapon. He didn't just knock the pile over. He carefully, deliberately, used the edge of the shovel to slide each stone off the pile, one by one, scattering them far into the undergrowth. He never let the metal tool touch more than one stone at a time. It was a slow, ritualistic process. As he slid the final, topmost stone away, a sound came from deep within the woods down the forbidden trail. It was a soft, wet, tearing sound. We both froze. It was followed by a low, guttural clicking, like 1,000 tongues clacking against teeth. It was a sound of hunger. It lasted for only a second, and then there was only the whisper of the wind in the pines. The silence that followed was worse than the noise itself. Silas finished scattering the stones and wiped the shovel on the dirt. "Some of the cold cases you read about," he said, his back still to me, "the ones where they find a car at a trailhead, but the person is just gone. No trace, no body, nothing. This is what happens. They follow a path that wasn't meant for them." He finally turned to face me, and his eyes were haunted. "The rules aren't just for our safety, Carter. They're for theirs too. We're not just keeping people out of dangerous places. We're keeping things from getting to them. We're maintaining a truce, and those cairns their invitations. Breaking the truce." I looked from the now empty space where the cairn had been to the dark, silent path it had marked. I thought about the thousands of visitors who pass through here every year, blissfully unaware, protected by a handful of rangers and a binder full of impossible rules. They saw a park, a playground. They didn't see the walls of the asylum. We walked back to the truck in silence. My military training had prepared me for identifiable threats, for enemies I could see and fight. This was different. This was a war of attrition against the very laws of nature, fought on the edges of sanity. As I got into the passenger seat, I glanced at the official park map lying on the dashboard. It showed neat lines, designated trails, and named features. It was a lie. A necessary, comforting lie. The real map was the one in Silas's binder, a map drawn in fear and written in blood. And I was just beginning to learn its geography. The incident with the pale cairn and the unseen, hungry thing on the forbidden trail marked a permanent shift in my psyche. The soldier in me, the man who relied on tangible threats and established combat doctrine, was gone. In his place was someone more primal, more alert. I had stopped trying to debunk the rules and started trying to survive them. My world had shrunk to the size of our small district, and its governing laws were the cryptic, blood-soaked entries in Silas's binder. That evening, as a storm gathered over the Absaroka range, Silas sat with me, not with whiskey, but with a stack of old, sepia-toned photographs. He pointed to a group of men in ill-fitting uniforms, standing awkwardly by a stagecoach near Mammoth Hot Springs. These were some of the first Rangers after the Army pulled out in 18. He said, his voice a low murmur against the rising wind. The cavalry had their own way of dealing with things. They had numbers, discipline, and they learned to give the strange parts of the park a wide berth. But these new guys, they were a mix. Some were former scouts who knew the land, but many were seasonal hires, 90-day wonders. They called them fresh-faced kids from back east looking for adventure. He tapped a photo of a young man with a confident smile. "This is Ranger Albright's man force," Silas said with a dry, humorless chuckle. They thought their biggest problems would be poachers and tourists carving their names into geyser cones. They didn't have a binder. They had to write the first pages themselves. That kid there, he pointed again at the smiling man, vanished near Shoshone Lake. His horse came back to the station alone. They never found a single boot print. The unspoken truth hung in the air. Between us, the official records would call it a tragic accident, another case of a man lost in the vast wilderness. But Silas and I knew it was a rule being learned. A new entry, paid for in full. The next 2 days were deceptively calm. The storm passed, leaving the air clean and sharp. We performed our duties with a quiet, shared understanding. We were no longer just patrolling trails. We were checking the integrity of a fragile perimeter. On the third day, our assignment was a long patrol of Yellowstone Lake's southern arms. At over 130 square miles, Yellowstone Lake is an inland sea, its depths plunging to over 400 feet. It's a place of immense, intimidating scale. As we launched the patrol boat from the marina, the water was like glass, reflecting the vast, empty sky. The sheer size of it makes you feel insignificant, a tiny speck in a world that is utterly indifferent to your existence. Most of this lake has never been properly surveyed, Silas said over the drone of the outboard motor, gesturing to the endless expanse of water. Not the bottom, not all the shoreline. The maps show you the shape of it, but they don't tell you what's in it or on it. His words echoed the chilling fact I'd read in the binder's notes. 97% of the park remains unsurveyed by archaeologists, a staggering amount of unknown territory. We spent hours cruising the remote inlets, the shoreline a monotonous, unbroken wall of lodgepole pine. It was beautiful, but the beauty now had an edge of menace. The deep woods felt less like a sanctuary for wildlife and more like a curtain hiding whatever watched from within. It was late afternoon when we entered a wide, shallow bay on the southeastern arm, a place so remote it felt like we were the first humans to ever see it. The shore was a crescent of black, volcanic sand. There was no trail, no sign of human passage. This was the heart of the unsurveyed wilderness. And that's when I saw him. "Silas, cut the engine," I said, my voice tight. I raised my binoculars, my hands suddenly slick with sweat. On the black sand, about 200 yards away, stood a lone figure. It was perfectly still, facing the water, its back to the forest. It wasn't a hiker. It wore no bright colors, carried no pack. It was dressed in dark, old-fashioned clothing that seemed to absorb the sunlight. A heavy coat and a wide, brimmed hat, completely wrong for the warm afternoon. It just stood at the water's edge, motionless. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Rule A80, if, during a patrol on Yellowstone Lake, you see a lone figure standing on the shore of the section designated the unsurveyed 97%, do not make landfall. Do not acknowledge them. Return to base. I see him. Silas breathed, his voice a strained whisper. He didn't reach for his binoculars. He didn't need to. His hand was already on the throttle, his knuckles white. "What is it?" I whispered, unable to tear my eyes from the magnified image. A lost tourist. Someone in trouble. The figure was utterly still, unnaturally so. Not a twitch, not a shift in weight. "It's a warning, Carter," Silas hissed. "It's a signpost. It's telling us this isn't our shore today. We're leaving." Now, as he spoke, the figure on the beach slowly began to turn. It moved with the same horrifying, mechanical smoothness as the bison had, a slow motion pivot that was utterly devoid of life. It turned not toward us, but toward the forest behind it. As its profile came into view, a cold, chemical dread flooded my system. Through the binoculars, I could see that the figure had no face. Where a nose, mouth, and eyes should have been, there was only a smooth, pale, and utterly featureless expanse of skin, like a mannequin's head left too long in the sun. It was a perfect, horrifying blank. I gasped and lowered the binoculars, my stomach churning. The image was seared into my brain. Silas didn't need to be told twice. He slammed the throttle forward, and the engine screamed as the boat surged, carving a hard, wide arc away from the shore. I risked one last glance back. The faceless thing had completed its turn and was now walking, not running, into the dense, dark wall of trees. It didn't push branches aside or duck under them. It simply entered the forest, vanishing into the shadows as if it were walking into open water. One moment it was there, the next it was gone. We didn't speak for the entire journey back. The sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and blood red, but the beauty was lost on me. All I could see was that smooth, blank face. It was a violation of everything, a symbol of a reality where the fundamental rules of biology and identity simply did not apply. It was the ultimate horror, not a monster, but a negation. Back in the bolted safety of the station, Silas finally spoke, his voice heavy with a wariness that seemed to seep from his bones. In the summer of '81, he began, staring into the middle distance. We had a seasonal ranger named Polly. Good kid. Eager. A little too sure of herself. She and her partner were on lake patrol, same area you and I were in today. They saw a figure on the shore. A woman in what looked like an old-fashioned dress. He paused, taking a shaky breath. Polly's partner, a veteran named McRae, knew the rule. He told her they had to leave, but Polly insisted. She was convinced it was a woman in distress, maybe a historical reenactor who'd gotten lost. She argued, said their duty was to help. Against his direct order, She beached the boat and went ashore, calling out. McRae said the woman in the dress just stood there, watching her approach. Silas closed his eyes. McRae stayed with the boat, like the rule says. He watched Polly get within 20 feet of the woman. He said Polly stopped and just stood there for a minute, as if they were talking, though he couldn't hear a thing. Then Polly turned around and walked back to the boat. She got in, sat down, and didn't say a word. McRae said her face was empty. He asked her what happened, who the woman was. She just looked at him, or rather, through him, and said, "It's time to go home." They came back to the station. Polly packed her things, resigned on the spot, and drove out of the park that night. No one ever heard from her again. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a terrible certainty. The official report says, Thelma Polly Melton resigned for personal reasons, but McRae swore that the person who came back to his boat wasn't the same person who left it. Something had been taken from her out there on that beach, or something had been put in its place. I sank into a chair, the strength gone from my legs. I thought of the faceless thing. It wasn't a lure, like the crying child. It wasn't a territorial warning, like the bison. It was something else. A transaction. An exchange. That night, I couldn't sleep. I took out the binder, its worn leather cover feeling like the skin of some ancient creature. I flipped past the first page of rules, the ones I now knew by heart. There were more pages, dozens more. Rules for the Northern District, with its petrified forests and strange, noxious fogs. Rules for the Eastern Mountains, full of warnings about trails that change when you're not looking and echoes that say your name. My life in the Army had been about bringing order to chaos. Here, I finally understood. The job was to simply acknowledge that chaos was the true order of things, and to stand watch on the paper, thin border we called reality. The rules weren't a defense. They were a treaty, a set of terms for our surrender, and we broke them at our peril